Help give kids an extra life by donating today to help sick and injured children. Link in the description and pinned comment below.
You go and play at the arcade. You see that cabinet standing there. If you got the skills, we got the thrills. You better be prepared. The silver hawks are flying, buddy. Ooh, the bellstar fish are crying, buddy. Ooh, but when you hear the siren sounding, heart starts pounding, boss is coming fast. So hold on tight. The battle's raging in the sky above. We're lining up to play some Darius. You're hoping that your ship is strong enough. The situation's getting perilous. Whoa, Darius. Whoa. 2D shooters are among the classic genres in gaming that you used to see a lot of in the early days. Nowadays, you don't hear about them as often as they've been overshadowed by open-world adventures, military shooters, RPGs, and other modernized genres, but you can still find a good shmup if you look hard enough. And back in the 80s and 90s, Taito had no shortage of great 2D shooters. But then again, Taito had no shortage of great games, period. And when it comes to shmups, Taito had two big series for that. The OG Space Invaders, which I've covered before, and Darius, a franchise that dared to be big and bold. And for those in the know, it's one of the trademark series when it comes to horizontal scrolling shooters. So get ready for one big intergalactic fishing trip as we look at the history of the Darius series. The development of Darius began with the ideas of designer Junji Yarita, planner Akira Fujita, and programmer Toru Sugawara. Fujita wanted to make a shooter with huge battleships as bosses. In order to make this game stand out from the crowd, Fujita put forth the idea of basing these battleships on various types of fish and marine life. Why exactly he got the idea to use marine life is anyone's guess, but hey, I never turned down a good fish fry. Yarita designed these battleships, creating a total of 26 designs, enough for the entire alphabet. However, time and budget constraints meant that the team could only implement 11 of these designs. I mean, it took about 10 days to implement just one of these bosses, and some of the unused designs ended up in promotional materials. As for the names of enemies, many were based on various medicines, as well as reversing the names of several Taito employees. Fujita also worked on the stage designs and power-up system, which he said was one of the most difficult parts. Originally, those upgrades were planned to be pod-like craft orbiting the player, but the idea was scrapped after Fujita looked at it and gave it the seal of nope. They even wanted the cabinet to stand out. This thing's like a micro-movie theater. The layout was designed by Natsuki Hirosawa, using 3 monitors reflected on the cabinet's back via mirrors to make it look seamless. Taito had done something like this before with Wyvern F-Zero and Super Dead Heat. What those games didn't have that Darius did, however, was a headphone jack with volume control and speakers below the seat. This setup, referred to by Taito as the Body Sonic system, did a great job in conveying the game's soundtrack, composed by Taito's in-house band Zuntata, founded by composer Hisayoshi Ogura. Ogura used a combination of FM synthesis and sampling in order to convey the idea of space. He actually remade the first stage's theme, Captain Neo, from a track used in an earlier Taito game called Metal Soldier Isaac 2. Darius would release in multiple territories in 1987, with Europe getting first dibs in January, Japan's version coming in February, and the US receiving the game in April. So let's pop a quarter in the slot and start this baby up! The story of Darius takes place in the distant future, on the planet Darius, which has come under attack by the vicious Belsar Empire. In order to help the survivors to escape, 2 brave pilots, Proko and Tiat, take flight in their fighter craft known as the Silverhawk. The game is a horizontal shooter, not unlike Radius or R-Type, but with the expanded screen real estate giving you a lot of room to maneuver, but also plenty of room for enemies as well. And like in your typical 2D shooter, you've got a power-up system. In Darius, you've got orbs that are dropped by enemies of a certain color. Red orbs power up your main weapon. The green orbs represent your missiles, which can be powered up into air-to-ground and air-to-ceiling type. Finally, the blue orbs represent armor, which is shortened to ARM on the heads-up display. If you fill up one of your meters, that power-up will evolve into a new form, which will be carried over if you lose a life. Of course, you'll be knocked down to the weakest level of that tier if that happens, so you'll be struggling to recover if that happens. Especially since you start off pretty damn weak. Even some normal enemies take several shots to kill. There are also hidden power-ups which include point bonuses, smart bombs, and extra lives. Once you reach the end of a zone, you'll receive a warning that a huge battleship is approaching fast. Nowadays, you'll see similar warnings in 2D shooters, but this was an innovative part of the immersion of the game. The majority of bosses in the series, as mentioned earlier, are based on various types of fish and aquatic life, and they take a lot of firepower to bring down. But once you do, you encounter another trademark of the Darius series, branching paths. By flying to the top or bottom of the screen, you can decide which zone you want to go to next, complete with a now iconic end-of-level message. There are 28 zones in all, but your run will take you through 7 of them, each with its own final boss and ending. This makes for a lot of replay value. Of course, you'll probably need several credits to reach the end anyway, since the original version of the game has no continues. Granted, continues weren't exactly common at the time, but there was an extra version of the game released later on, which added continues and rebalanced the game, but only until the final stage of each run. Now, Darius was a commercial and critical success, and helped Taito get a foothold into the shoot-'em-up genre for several reasons. The first thing that stands out is the presentation, which holds up impressively well considering the era that it came from. The environments are really well done in this game, with excellent pixel art and beautiful parallax scrolling, which not a lot of games had in '86. Not to mention the sprite work on your ship and the enemies was top-notch. And the bosses? Hoo boy, you can tell a lot of work got put into them. They even had unique names which were conveyed to you with each warning, even if the names were weird, like King Fossil, Fatty Glutton, and Great Thing? Gee, could you be more generic than that? As for the music, Zuntata's chiptunes never miss, and Darius is no exception. The stage and boss themes are a treat for the ears, and the gameplay, while simpler than, say, Gradius, is still challenging and thrilling. Heck, the simpler gameplay style gave the programmers time to focus on the level design. That doesn't change the fact that the game is hard as hell. There are, however, a couple issues with its first installment. For starters, the hidden point bonuses are completely random in value. Second, and more indicative of early shooters, is the poor checkpoint placement, which could screw you over if you died and needed to power up again. Still, the good outweighed the bad for this first entry, and it proved to be the highest earning cabinet in Japan in April of '87, and the third highest earning large cabinet of the year in the region. Now obviously this was a game that required a 16-bit platform to port for home versions, and these versions were interesting to say the least. Most of them were for the PC engine, known as the TurboGrafx-16 outside of Japan, but these wouldn't be released until 1990. The first, Super Darius, was released for the CD-ROM add-on, with a game card version titled Darius Plus released later that year. The third version, Darius Alpha, was an interesting case. It was only released via sweepstakes giveaway, and only 800 copies were made. This version was a special boss rush game, pitting you against all your fishy foes one after another. Many years later, in 2019, a port of Darius was also made for the Sega Genesis Mini, and in 2020, Darius Extra version was distributed for the Genesis by Strictly Limited Games. Though if you want the definitive version of the original, play the extra version of the arcade port. Why does it smell like the Downeaster Alexa right now? That was the name of a fishing boat, by the way. Darius would go on to launch a long-running franchise which would span arcades, consoles, handhelds, and PC alike. And like each franchise should do, each installment of the Darius series would strive to do something a little bit different. In 1989, arcades would see the release of Darius II, or Sagaya as it would be named outside of Japan. This game follows the survivors of Darius after having established themselves on the planet Olga. When they receive an SOS from the solar system, Proco Jr. and Tiat Young would hop into the updated Silverhawks to take on the Belsar forces once again. Now, unlike the 3-screen wide panorama of the original Darius, the sequel was more commonly stretched 2 screens wide. As for the game itself, the gameplay was generally the same as before, but with some noticeable changes. First, the power-ups, which were now obtained by destroying entire formations of enemies. Instead of tiers, your ship would constantly power up with each upgrade, now represented by shields. However, this increased the risk, as you drop back to square one with every death. One mistake could set you back drastically. There were also 2 new power-ups you could find. A yellow one which would supplement your bombs with vertical lasers, and rainbow power-ups which would boost all your indicators at once. Also, this was one of the first games to include an auto-fire option in the dip switches. Good for people who want to avoid carpal tunnel! As for levels themselves, they now included captains. mini-bosses which were basically smaller versions of the bosses from the previous game. And in the actual boss fights, sometimes the bosses would move behind you, in which case your Silverhawk would simply turn around so you wouldn't just have to wait out an attack pattern. Good call there. Finally, the game showed an area map which you'd use to pick your next zone instead of flying to the top or bottom of the screen. This is how stage selection was handled from here on out. While not as successful as the first game, it was still good enough to warrant continuing the franchise, and was ported to several consoles including the Mega Drive, Master System, and PC Engine CD. Nowadays, you'll find it in a few collections, as well as the Arcade Archives line. Following Darius II, or Sagaya, the series would temporarily shift to consoles, or more specifically, the Super Nintendo. The next two games would feature on Nintendo's 16-bit heavyweight, starting with Darius Twin in 1991. This game takes place thousands of years after the original Darius, as the Belsar army invades Olga. As this is a console title, there's only one screen to work with here, limiting your movement options. Also, given that it was relatively early in the console's lifespan, it lacks some of the flashier elements of later games on the platform. Though, given that Darius Twin manages to perform consistently well even at times when the screen gets cramped, that may have been an advantage. Sometimes limitations work in your favor, what can I say? I guess one of said limitations was repurposing sprites from the first two games as well. And the presentation is pretty damn good for an early Super NES title. The quality of the environments looked good, and the music has the kind of techno-rock we would later see in Mega Man X 2 years later. As for the gameplay, it largely takes from Darius 2, with a couple differences. For one, your ship retains all its power-ups when destroyed, so losing one life doesn't feel like a debilitating punishment. Note that I said losing one life. That's because, to balance the upgraded Silverhawk's greater power, there are no continues. Seriously, Darius 2 had continues, why couldn't you carry that over as well? The pattern of the level select screen also shows fewer stages than Darius 2, most likely due to cartridge restrictions. And all roads lead to the same final stage. So, how do you get various endings in Darius Twin? Well, let me put it to you this way. To get the best ending in this game, you need to follow a specific route, not let one of the final bosses escape, and complete the game without dying even once. Good luck with that, Chief! This game has garnered mixed reactions, with some people loving it and others thinking of it as merely bland, like not putting seasonings on your baked salmon. I say find a copy somewhere or get the collection and make your own conclusions. The same goes for the next game in the franchise, 1993's Darius Force, or Supernova as it was localized as. What is it with confusing localized names? Jeez! Now this game made some big changes to the Darius formula. This was the first game in the series which features multiple selectable ships. You could use the Silverhawk from the first Darius, the one from Darius 2, or a brand new one, with each one featuring a different set of weapons to power up. Also, the power-ups are different in this game as well. Now the lasers and bombs are upgraded with the same power-up, but if you fire both of them at once, their power drops a little. That adds some strategy to the game, since you'd need to use one weapon at a time to get the most out of both. You could also switch between bombs and vertical lasers with the press of a button. Of course, unlike how lenient Darius Twin was with dying, not only does Darius Force bring back the checkpoint system of the original Darius, but dying means you lose all your weapon upgrades, once again leaving you with a pea shooter for a gun. At least this game has continues. Now the levels also have some elements that are different from previous games that sound good on paper, but not so much in execution. And the bosses go beyond the typical marine motif, including some bosses based on mollusks and even dinosaurs. As for the map, it's a bit more restrictive in that you can only select zones that are above or to the right. Once you move to a higher row, you can't go back down. In terms of presentation, the sprites look great, including the new bosses, and the backgrounds continue to impress. The music, on the other hand? Oh dear. This is honestly the weakest soundtrack in the series so far, and it's mainly due to the sound font they used. The Super NES is capable of so much more in terms of sound. Darius Force, to me, feels like a step back from Twin, characterized by interesting ideas that needed more polish to be effective. So it's less of a supernova and more like a dollar store firecracker that someone bought illegally to piss off the neighbors. Now we go from one of the series' weaker entries to some of the best, returning to the arcade with Darius Gaiden, released in 1994. Originally pitched as Darius 3, this game was developed to show off Taito's then new F3 system, which ran on cartridges similar to the Neo Geo and CPS-2 boards. The story picks up as another group of Darius refugees stationed on planet Vatis seeks to return to their home planet, only to be attacked by Belsar forces. With all but 2 of their Silverhawks destroyed, a pair of brave pilots strikes back to save their people. Being a game on the F3 system meant that this was the first Darius arcade game to be limited to 1 screen width, but who cares when the game is this good? Let's start with the presentation. The sprite work in this game is better than ever, with excellent scaling, and sometimes you can see bosses approach you from the background. And speaking of the backgrounds, they look amazing in this game. The scrolling elements look awesome, and transitions between background elements add that little extra something. And they even bring back the full end-of-level message. As for the music, it takes on a bit of a different tone than before, with the inclusion of vocal tracks. Some people are divided on this music. I don't know, I think it's great. As for additions to the gameplay, first is the inclusion of screen-clearing bombs. This game's iteration is the Black Hole Bomb, which creates a vortex on screen which sucks in smaller enemies and projectiles, then explodes into a flash of lightning which heavily damages any enemy that survives. Used wisely, they can get you out of a jam before you end up toast. Second, when you encounter mini-bosses, you'll notice a strange orb embedded in their bodies. Damage it enough to shake it loose, collect it, and you can capture the mini-boss to use as a satellite weapon temporarily. That's awesome! Many fans of the series will point to this as the best game in the series, and one of the best shmups of all time, due to its focus on gameplay instead of gimmicks, and its improved presentation. It would later be ported to Saturn, PlayStation, and Windows, as well as later being a part of the Darius Cosmic Collection, so it's definitely worth a look. There would also be an extra version released later on with remixed levels, new power-up tiers, and a hidden marathon mode. Sadly, this version isn't in the collection.
Well, I guess you can't have it all.
Then comes 1997, and the age of 3D was beginning. Even franchises that wanted to remain in 2D adapted to 3D models, creating the style called 2.5D. Which brings us to G-Darius. So does the G stand for great? Or generation? Or gee whiz, why can't they come up with more normal titles for all these games? This game is actually a prequel which chronicles the origin of the Silverhawk and a battle for survival against a biomechanical army whose ships would be used by the Belsar forces. Long story short, the ancestors of the people of Darius brought all the terror upon themselves when they destroyed a planet they were at war with.
Wait, so have we been playing as the real baddies this whole time?
So, as I mentioned, G-Darius retains the series' 2D gameplay, but the visual style of the game focuses on 3D models. The core gameplay leans heavily more towards the original Darius, specifically in terms of the power-up system. So tier upgrades are permanent, but in-tier power levels are at risk. That system. With that being said, there were some new elements, including the new capture balls. This is an updated version of the capture system from Gaiden, which expands upon it. Now you can use these balls on any minor enemy and mini-bosses as well once you remove their protective plating. Again, once you've captured an enemy, it will serve as a satellite for a limited time, but now you can also detonate it like a bomb causing massive damage. However, the captured enemy can serve another purpose as well, and that comes most into play during boss battles. The bosses in this game have wide arsenals, but one attack common to all of them. Giant freaking lasers! But if you have a captured enemy, you can absorb it into your cannon to fire your own giant freaking laser, and this can lead to a beam clash. When this happens, you either mash or hold the fire button, depending on the version, in order to cause your giant freaking laser to grow into an even more giant freaking laser. Something that can happen up to 4 times to absolutely annihilate the boss in question should you be able to pull it off. As for the level design, it comes with a twist. There are actually mid-level variations which allow you to decide your path through each of the 15 possible levels. Some of these variations even affect the boss's attack patterns. Combine that with the then next-gen presentation, and it stands alongside Gaiden as a contender for the series' best. Not only was it ported to PS1, but it also got an HD remaster in 2021, making it accessible to today's generation, and it's definitely worth checking out. Following the release of G-Darius version 2 in 1999, the series would go quiet, seemingly never to return. Little did people suspect that 10 years of pressure were building up behind the dam. It started out simple enough with the Japan-only release of DariusBurst on the PSP in 2009. This was the first Darius game not developed in-house by Taito, instead being outsourced to a developer named Pyramid, best known for their work on the Patapon games.
Wait, Pyramid? It all makes sense! The Belsar are powered by that most terrifying of intergalactic evils! Ancient Egypt!
The main gimmick in this game is the burst system, which replaces the alpha beam from G-Darius. Now fueled by a meter which fills as you destroy enemies, the beam can either be fixed to your ship or detached to remain in place while firing. And depending on which ship you use, it can fire either in front of or behind you. The game includes basic arcade mode and a mission mode, as well as an unlockable full power but one life mode. But this would be the first in what will become a series unto itself. A year later, DariusBurst Another Chronicle marked the series' return not only to arcades, but to the super widescreen format of the original Darius. In fact, it was so wide that it marked the first game in the series to have 4-player co-op, including 4 different ships to accommodate. In original mode, a run lasted only 3 stages, and you could pick one of 3 starting points. And those stages, well, you've heard of Bullet Hell, now get ready for Enemy Hell. These levels were swarming with enemies. Good thing you now turn around at will. But the game's main mode is Chronicle Mode, a mass mission mode where progress is saved per cabinet, relying on the community to liberate each planet. The following year, we got an updated version called DariusBurst Another Chronicle EX, which would be the basis for all console ports. This revision added 4 more ships to select, a more difficult original EX mode, and event mode in which players could compete for high scores in limited time events, making this an element of live service games. Then in 2015, the definitive form of the game would arrive on PS4 and Steam in the form of DariusBurst Chronicle Saviors. This not only included a port of Another Chronicle EX, but also the new CS mode, which serves as a single-player story mode that takes place over numerous planets. There was also a DLC mode, which featured downloadable ships from other Taito games, as well as Sega, Cave, Aiding, and Capcom, released throughout 2016 and early 2017. Some of these DLC packs were handled by G-Rev, who replaced Pyramid as developers in September of 2016. Finally, in 2022, DariusBurst CS Core plus Taito Sega pack came to Switch with the Taito and Sega DLC plus some exclusive stages. Man, that's a lot to take in. And it's where we leave off for now. And nearly 40 years later, the Darius series hasn't lost its appeal. This franchise has combined ambitious style with engaging substance in a way that has appealed to fans of shmups for a long time. But more than anything, this is a series that has long prided itself on its massive scale, both in terms of its iconic bosses and giant arcade cabinets, and in terms of its universe. From the ginormous marine-based bosses to Zuntata's ever-evolving soundtracks and everything in between, there's a reason why this series is remembered well by fans of Taito's work. So it's no surprise that we've seen it referenced in some of Taito's other games. Rainbow Islands has an entire stage based on it, as does Bubble Symphony, and the Silverhawk makes an appearance in Space Invaders 95. Hell, Bubble Memories even has the same method of introducing bosses. And if you want to check out the series for yourself, well, there's a few collections which contain basically the whole series, so there's no time like the present, and I hear ice fishing can be pretty fun.
As for what the future holds, well, that's hard to say. But honestly, nothing's impossible considering Taito's interest in its vintage history. I mean, if Bubble Bobble and Bust-A-Move can get new titles, there's always a chance we could see a new Darius game one day. Let's hope the Silverhawks have been polished. I'm the Quarter Guy, and until next time, the arcade is closed.
Hey everyone, QG here. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and share the video around. Feel free to check me out on Blue Sky and Tumblr, as well as my live streams on Twitch. If you want to support my channel, you can become a channel member or check out my Patreon, and don't forget about my Extra Life campaign supporting Children's Wisconsin. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.